It's one heck of a trailer right there. So guys, help me introduce director Lydia Tenaglia and executive producer Anthony Bourdain. Keep it going for them, keep it going. Wait till they get to their chairs. The applause has to cover the chair break. Guys, congratulations. It's so great to have you up here. Lydia, I want to start with you. I just want to get into how you guys, I think it will help the audience, how you guys started working together, the creative collaboration. So how did you...
On this film or...
On the, just in general.
I mean,
in general.
we've been working
you
together
guys worked together for a while.
That's a long story.
It's a long story, yeah.
It's a little
A good
summary.
one.
Just let's get the relationship going.
Well, we've been working together for 17 years. I met Tony when he was still executive chef at Leal Restaurant. He had written Kitchen Confidential, and I heard he was going to write another book called Cook's Tour. So I called him. I went to the restaurant. We met. We talked. I said, would you ever consider turning that into a television series? He said, I don't care, whatever. And so we shot a 10-minute demo at Leal where he just talked about what it would be like for him to travel and see the world. So it was all just kind of conjecture. And we turned that into a 23-part series for the Food Network called The Cook's Tour. And then we moved on to do No Reservations for 8 years on Travel Channel. Now we're on Parts Unknown on CNN. So it's been a long ride together and kind of fun,
Yeah.
I would say.
I've pretty much never made any TV, certainly not any TV that I'm proud of with anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just love to hear why it works, how you guys work together so well.
Well, as Lydia will be the first to tell you, in the beginning, I really sucked. I mean, I had no understanding of how to make television. I resented the whole medium. I was working for Food Network, which surprised me because I remember they said, well, we have a meeting with Food Network. I said, why would they ever hire me? I've done nothing but be viciously cruel to their entire stable of stars. I didn't bother to shave, I think, or brush my teeth for that meeting because I was so sure it was going to go bad. But somehow I found myself in Tokyo for the first episode, and it came as a rude surprise to me that I would have to actually, they asked me at one point, they said, look at the camera and say, where are we, and why are you here, and what do you expect to find? And I was like, you expect me to talk? I somehow thought that I would be wandering around investigating for this book, and they would shoot me from over the shoulder or something. I guess it started when, for me, we were in Vietnam, which was the second series of shows we were doing. We used to shoot like 6 or 8 in a go, 3 or 4 different countries. So I found myself in Vietnam, feeling not particularly good, laying on my bed in this really shitty hotel with a ceiling fan going slowly round and round, and Chris.
It sounds like some sort of like French movie or something like that, in black and white.
Lydia's husband came in with the camera, said, let's go shoot. And I said, dude, look, Saigon, shit. And we just started a riff on Apocalypse Now, and over the next few weeks, we realized, or I did, that, well, television actually can be fun and a creative enterprise, especially when you don't give a shit about the customer, really.
Right. Great message. I love that. Now, what about Jeremiah Tower? If you did ever shot every time somebody said charming in this movie, I think you get fairly drunk by halfway through. I mean, he's a charmer. He's such a fascinating figure. What made the documentary happen?
Tony read Jeremiah's memoir. It was called California Dish. It's actually been re-released. It's called Start the Fire. It's a fantastic read. And he gave me the book. And when I read it, I was kind of startled by the fact that having worked in and around food television for almost 17 years now, I had heard of all the other players in that story except for the guy who wrote the book. And, I thought that was very curious. Like, who is this guy? Clearly he had an amazing impact on the culinary landscape of the United States, on the restaurant scene, on the way we eat, where we eat, how we eat. Yet I'd never even heard his name. So that was kind of the starting point, I think, for the whole documentary pursuit, just to figure out, where is he? Why haven't we heard of him? Why haven't more people heard of him? And just, quite frankly, there was a little bit of a mystery of where is he now, because he was no longer living in San Francisco where he made his bones. He was, we found him in a small town in Mexico somewhere. and that was kind of the beginning. So
I mean, my initial interest was I'd been hearing of him. I read the book and I realized how much of the food in my own career had been influenced by his work without me ever realizing it. I'd heard the name spoken admiringly, and I was aware of the sort of legend of new American cuisine and California cuisine. And here in this book is documentary evidence of menus before Jeremiah, menus after Jeremiah. He makes a very compelling case, as do the people who speak about him in the film. So initially, maybe the motivation came from kind of a bad place. I was angry. I thought it's really outrageous that this guy has been, written out of history and erased from the picture, especially given how important, really vitally important his role was. So originally I was pissed off and I was looking to sort of set the record straight. And that's a bad reason to make a film or to tell a story when you have an agenda. But of course, as Lydia we both started interviewing him, and as Lydia started to put together the film and do the research, and I saw what was coming back, it became a much more nuanced and much more interesting story about, a time, a place, a group of people, and of course one very, very strange and fascinating and difficult and brilliant man.
Yeah. Talking about the people that you have referencing him in the film, I think we have a couple clips. So let's start with the first one, and actually Martha Stewart, I think, makes an appearance in this first clip.
Yeah.
Now, that is the beginning of the film, and you can see that anger that you're talking about, Anthony, from everybody who's speaking. Why do people not know about this guy? When did the movie take a twist that maybe you didn't expect to happen, as far as another part of the story unfolding? Maybe, Lydia, you can talk about that.
yeah, I think there were a lot of twists in making the film. When we first started out, it was sort of very logically broken down into this very neat 3-act structure of exploring his childhood. There was all these incredible formative memories that he had traveling around the world. His parents, he sort of came from moneyed neglect in that, his parents traveled him everywhere, and, he sort of lived a life of luxury and fine hotels, but he was essentially, he was like emotionally abandoned. His mother was an alcoholic, his father was a jerk. So he was kind of left to his own devices very early on. So that was sort of the childhood exploration of his formative memories. He spent a lot of time in and around kitchens as a child, in hotels and on ships. And then the second act was really Chez Panisse, when he really kind of steps into Alice Waters' world for the first time in 1971. Never trained as a chef, just needed a job, walked in there. And then Act 3 was really Stars, like his grand opus, which he built to great heights, and then it crumbled to the ground. At one point, when we thought we were finished shooting the whole project, he mysteriously disappears and reemerges in New York, and he takes on this job at Tavern on the Green as the executive chef. This was in 2015. And it just kind of like fucked up the whole structure
So
of the
you guys
film.
didn't see that coming? He didn't broadcast
No.
to you at all?
It was
No?
like,
Oh, wow.
suddenly...
Lydia was all excited. First devastated because the film was done. We had a last shot in mind. Jeremiah disappears off in
Walking into the
Mexico.
sunset, yeah.
Now he's at the biggest, highest volume goat rodeo restaurant, in New
Tourist
York, and it's potentially a whole other film, a whole other story. And Lydia's like, "What do I do?" And I'm like, "Don't worry, this is going to be over real quick." But I think one of the things that makes that surprised us both, it certainly surprised me, was here you have a story about a boy, a sexually abused boy, a boy who grows up alone, absolutely alone in these, grand luxury hotels all over the world and ocean liners, who talks about it still as if these were wonderful things, wonderful good times, made me who I am today. Really has, the writer John Birdsall refers to Jeremiah Tower's invincible armor of pleasure, and the way in which these tangible things like first-class service, baccarat crystal, properly folded napkin, a well-served rack of lamb, a menu. How the way in which these things very effectively seem to protect this lost boy was both interesting and difficult, because very hard man to interview to get him to say, that hurt.
Yeah.
I was lonely.
Right.
My childhood was not fully satisfying. That's not the way he describes events.
Yeah.
Also, another feature that I find is a clip of Ruth Reichel talking that captures very much the effect of, she describes Jeremiah Tower back in the early 70s walking into a room. And she said it was like everyone else in the room was gray, and he was golden. And he was really the first fuckable chef.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to fuck him, men and women alike. And many might well have. He was not immune to the fact that he was charming and attractive, and that too was both a game changer as far as the role of the celebrity chef in society, and very, very unusual. He was the first chef in America who people wanted to see in the dining room. Before that, we were backstairs help. It's like we were the service personnel. You were not happy at Stars if you didn't get some FaceTime with Jeremiah. It was this glamorous figure you wanted to see in the dining room. You wanted his opinion. You wanted to hear what he thought you should eat. That had not occurred in American fine dining before.
Yeah. Lydia, I want to get press on a note that Anthony just said there. It's hard to get him to delve deeper. He's a charming guy. He's a happy-go-lucky guy. I mean, the stuff with Alice Waters and those restaurants, those tough times. It seems like it'd be hard to get him to open up with that and actually share the darker. I mean, was that hard for you? Was that rough to get that out of him?
Yeah, I mean, Tony has called me this before, and Jeremiah actually called me this several times, but he said, you're like a bitch with a bone. And so I just never gave up. I think there was moments where he really wanted to just push me away, and he did, verbally, and just would stop communicating. And, I think I was just very persistent in a way that was not obnoxious, that I really just wanted to get to the heart of his story. And very early on, I think, here's someone who's controlled his public image his entire career. He gave me the 10 photographs I was allowed to look at, and here's the 10 people you're allowed to talk to, and these 2 may talk negatively about me, so you can talk to them. And he gave me this whole array, and I just had this heart-to-heart with him, and I said, I'm not going to do a puff piece about your life. I'm not interested in that. We're making a feature documentary. It really has to plumb the depths. And if you're not willing to go there, we can't do it. And I think it was just reiterating that message over and over again. And then I think as he saw me really dig deep and pull up this, amazing archival material from his life and talk to certain people, and he started to back away from that control. And it sort of happened fairly late in the process, but I think he finally relinquished that sense of, I need to control the message, and we pushed forward together. We definitely had major ups and downs. When he took the Tavern job, he pretty much kicked me out of the kitchen entirely, and then I kept going up there, and I was sort of hovering around, and he finally slowly let me back in. So it was definitely a process.
Yeah, I think we have some more of that archival photos. So with that in the next clip, yeah. It's great. It's so great. I mean, it's fascinating. People know more about this guy. I mean, what does Jeremiah think about the final product and how it's come together and getting his message out there again? Now new articles are being written. He's being acclaimed again. What's that process like for him?
Yeah, I mean, when he saw the film, he hadn't seen the film until about 2 days before it premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, and I rented a theater, and he and I went and screened the film together for the first time, and I think it was quite shocking for him. It was his really first experience of it, and he was rather speechless and a little rattled, I think, because people are psychoanalyzing his life and his highs and his lows and everything in between, talking about his sexuality. And we left there. We proceeded to march into a bar where he got completely shit-faced, like totally shit-faced. And I, had to kind of scoop him up and put him in a cab. And I didn't hear from him for 2 days. And then finally, I think it settled, and he was able to just take it in and then appreciate it for what it was, which is really the story of his life.
Anthony, I'm sure you were able to help him through that, being somebody who's been on the screen a few times and shared his story a few times.
Well, look, he's very good at handling himself publicly. I mean, he supported the film. He came out, did a lot of panels and discussions and radio interviews, a lot of them with me. So he's very comfortable as an interview subject. I like to think that he's pleased. I know he's pleased and surprised to have this reevaluation of his career. At very least, the importance, his actual role in the American food revolution, which I have to stress, he was completely written out of. Not just by the initial protagonist, but by the entire almost the entire food writing community, for reasons of access, for reasons of laziness. If you tell a bullshit story long enough, you have to stick with it. And I think that kind of happened. If the person who's not around, if you have to choose between the person who's not around to write a story and the person who's around, you're gonna write the story that's friendly to the person who's still around, who's going to give you quotes and access and kitchen tours and that sort of thing. So I think this machine and inertia sort of slowly over time wrote him out, and then he became an inconvenient man in the sense that here was a guy saying, "Hey, wait a minute. This is what I did." It's like, shut up, man. That's not the way. That's not the creation story that we believe now. Right. And it's shocking, to see good, well-respected journalists, how truly wretched and disingenuous, knowingly disingenuous and lazy their work was on this subject, on this area. I'm thinking of a Leslie Stahl 60 Minutes piece in particular that was just breathtaking in its dishonesty and stupidity and credulousness. And you could see, this sort of thing really
get to you.
pissed
Absolutely.
me off.
Yeah. Lydia, I mean, again, you're talking about this guy's legacy as well, and then you have the Tavern on the Green thing going on. I'm sure you're wondering how to frame that event in his life with all the success that he's had before and all the great things that he's done for California cuisine, all the things that he's founded. How did you treat that section of the film, and how do you decide to frame that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really challenging because stylistically we went from a very produced, there's interviews, recreations, archival footage type of storytelling to something that actually just pivoted into a follow doc verite style with a lot of unknowns to it. So he started the job in November, the very beginning of November. I followed him for as much as I could in November. He kicked me out of the kitchen in December. And then I was able to come back in January and February. So it was a 3-month process of filming him, just following, wondering where the story was going to go. I think what was clear pretty early on. And I called him. I'm like, he's gonna turn it around. I know he is. It's gonna be a triumphant ending.
No.
And he was like, no.
He's doomed.
I'm like, you're wrong. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be this rose that we put at the top of this thing. And he's like, no, don't get your hopes up. It's not gonna work out. And you could see once I came back in January, you could see there was cracks.
What does Jeremiah say? That he's a big fan of the Slim Chance, is it?
Yeah.
He he knew that it was an unrealistic expectation. I mean, the man is how old?
He's 73 now.
First of all, 72 to in your 70s, look, to in your 50s, go back in the kitchen. Even
Reinvent
even in
something
your
that's-
40s, to go back into the kitchen after a break of that many years. It is a young person's game. It's incredibly stressful to do it at a place like Tavern, this high volume tourist barn. It's a known legendary chef killer. It's crushed younger, more recently employed chefs. It was a very romantic venture on his part.
I think we have a clip of that section we can show right now. I will say it's a great place to have a drink with your family if you need to after the theater. But I mean, you say it so well. I mean, I think it's one of those situations where it's a difficult beast, and it seemed a bit cathartic for Jeremiah to talk about his experience with the owners. I mean, he definitely lets loose.
I think
in
he
the
was
film.
actively. I mean, this was contemporaneous filmed as it was happening. I don't think it was cathartic. I think he was genuinely angry and hurt and disappointed, and reality was setting in. I mean, Jeremiah has always been about glamour, about fabulousness. Tavern on the Green is a place, if you're from Iowa and you come to New York and you build your own life and you make new friends, that's where you bring your mom when she comes to town, or your grandmother, because you could be, A, she'll like it, B, you won't see anybody there who knows you.
Lydia, I mean, what was it like for you to sort of cap it off like that, but also to keep the conversation with him going? I mean, did you want to do something after that? Did you want to film more with him after that experience?
No, I mean, in all honesty, the 3 months we shot there could have been a film in and of itself. I mean, I had material with him inside Tavern, outside Tavern. It really was its own story. And everything we captured there that's in the film was happening in real time. So that whole unraveling that happens at the end, and his, as you described it, as sort of cathartic, I would call it angry, vitriolic, expression of his experience, all happened in real time. None of that was, produced after the fact. I knew it was all falling apart, and I went up there and I planted a camera in the corner of his small apartment, and I just sat there as he was making his way through all these texts and phone calls, as he realized, I think, that he had lost his job. He had had an angry tirade, left the restaurant, and then they basically said, "We're done with you." So I was watching that whole thing unfold, and it was pretty extraordinary. I think he's just sort of got to a point, and I think it also just reflects maybe the trust he had in me at that moment, because he just let it go, and he kind of expressed his anger in all of its glory. And so it's very dramatic, I think, for the purposes of the film. Really, structurally, the Tavern story at the end just really served as a backdrop to tell the ending of the Stars story. So we sort of used certain moments in Tavern as these sort of punctuation beats to tell why and how his own empire crumbled, so badly in the late 90s. So that's kind of, it was a delivery device to tell this other ending.
Well, it's not a big downer. Jeremiah's okay.
Yeah,
He's got
he's
a
okay.
great memoir.
No, he's got a great
he's got
memoir.
a great film out here. I mean,
Yeah.
what's he up to next? And what's
He's
going
writing
on?
more
He's
books.
Very vital. Yeah.
He's talking about opening a tiny little restaurant with Mario Batali on the Amalfi Coast. Which would
Another
be
man who's a
perfect for him.
charmer. There we go. There's the two of them together. I feel like will be.
I think Jeremiah will do okay.
Yeah, he's back in Mexico. He's very happy. Yeah.
And I mean, Batali is one of those guys who speaks so fondly of him. I mean, he was probably a pretty early get as far as one of the guys that would speak about his effect because of his Stars experience.
It wasn't hard getting chefs to talk about Jeremiah Tower. I mean, the respect within the industry has always been huge. I mean, we're talking about a legendary figure. So Jeremiah Tower walks into a restaurant, the kitchen is going to freak. It's going to be red alert. all hands on board.
Much like Anthony Bourdain if he walks in.
It's
Yeah,
bigger
that's true.
by far. I mean, this was really an important figure who really changed the way menus look. Every menu now attributes, ingredients, to the source of the ingredients, usually to American producers. This was unthinkable before Jeremiah. The seasonality, the regional aspect, as well as his love of the classics. I mean, Jeremiah's in many ways not a guy, he's not a 21st or even a 20th century man. He's a 19th century man.
If you guys had to cast a biopic with Jeremiah, I mean, he's such a great personality, but who would you put in that role? Do you guys know? Do you option those rights?
That's tough. And I mean, an actor who's really, I think you'd have to go back in time, go back some,
Definitely.
someone who's equally attractive to men and women. I think that would be really, really important. Like a Montgomery Clift or someone like that. I mean, somebody really, an extraordinary actor with extraordinary qualities, unlike just about everybody around them. I mean, I can't think of anybody offhand. Maybe a taller Montgomery Clift.
He definitely had that mid-Atlantic accent because although he was born in the States, his family moved to Australia when he was a boy, and he spent some time there, and then they moved to England, and then he moved back to the States. So he always retained this sort of amalgam of all those places. His accent is really pretty magnificent. So
what memoir?
He's such a European. He's European in so many ways that all actors I can think of, unfortunately, I'm thinking of German, Italian, and French actors. No one with that kind of mid-continental English accent.
Well.
I don't think so.
What memoirs are you guys reading now? What's the next doc? Are you guys? I mean, obviously, you guys are working on TV together still. So what's next for the collaboration?
yeah, we're working on a project based on a book by David Moranis called Once in a Great City. It's a 4-part limited run docuseries for CNN based on that book, and it really explores Detroit during 1961 to 64, when the city was really sort of kind of at this incredible bubble of greatness and had so much promise and hope. So that's going to be out next year, that Tony's executive producer on. Yeah.
I think people would be upset if I didn't ask you where you're traveling to next, Tony. What's coming up?
I can't say where I'm going to next, but it's a domestic show, and I'm really very excited about it.
Okay, where'd you like the best last then? Where's a great place for us to book a ticket to?
To go to?
We're all going after this.
Look, I'm a big fan of, places that you wouldn't think necessary. I mean, look, I love Rome, and I'm there a lot, okay? But this is no surprise that Rome is great. Where's great that you might not think is great? Beirut is incredible. Beirut is a place everybody should go. Oman, the country of Oman, was an extraordinary experience for me. Uruguay is pretty cool. These were all really, really, really pleasant surprises, and to the extent that we can travel in Iran, that was a really revelatory, life-changing experience for me as well. To see what it's like to just walk the streets of Tehran and meet ordinary people. We know what the government's like. We have a pretty good idea. The evidence is in the newspapers every day, and in their own statements, and in their activities. But the people are amazing, and the society within Iran itself was absolutely shocking to me. The food is great. I would say, Beirut and Iran in the first place, because if we ever needed to look at the Muslim world in a way likely to make us empathetic or to enlarge our understanding, this can only be a good thing.
Well said. Well, I think we have some questions out in the audience. Yeah, exactly. You can applaud that 100%. Yeah.
As a documentary filmmaker, I know your last goal was probably to influence the subject in any way. And it sounded like you had a complete beginning, middle, and end for your movie, and all of a sudden there is this sort of resurgence. How much influence or responsibility do you think that sort of looking at the first part of his life might have inspired him to take another bite at the apple?
Completely.
Okay.
From my perspective, I think he took that Tavern job because he knew I was documenting his life. And I think there was an impulse there to say, hold on a second, I don't want people seeing me shuffling along on a beach in Mexico somewhere. So I think that there was I personally think he took that job specifically for that reason. While he will say, I thought the filming was over. No. I think he knew very well that I would bite on that apple, and I did. And although he made a lot of protestations, while I tried to shoot him there, he let me in a big way. So I would say that the film definitely influenced him taking that job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Has the Tavern on the Green sequence in the film helped you to change the rhythms, to speed them up because of all that chaos in the kitchens that you described?
Yeah, the rhythm of the film definitely took a turn at that point. As I was describing earlier, it was a very structured, produced piece up until that point. And the one last thing we had to shoot was Jeremiah in Mexico, which would have also been, I think, very dreamy in nature. And then once he took that job, just stylistically, aesthetically, the shooting changed, just the conceit of shooting changed, because I was now following him around in a story that I really had no idea where it was going. And there was certainly, I felt a lot of nausea at that point, because I'm like, this fucking film is over. Like, why am I shooting, But, you could see what it was extraordinary, as Tony mentioned earlier, was you could see this man at the age of 73 years old just roll up his sleeves and get to work. So it was a very contemporary example of what he was so capable of doing very early on, having no culinary training at all. He stepped into a kitchen in 1971 at Chez Panisse, and he took everything he had learned as a kid in all of his travels, and he had studied cookbooks, and he just got to work. And you could see the same vision at play. And so there was an excitement there, I think, too. And people feel it when they're watching the film, that there's a pivot point at that point.
What was the biggest influence that he had on you?
Well, I was cooking a lot of food that was influenced by him that I had no idea. I was doing I remember his lobster gazpacho for years without any idea that it had come from him. Just it was, a chef who might have worked with Jeremiah or who lifted it from his cookbook, had cooked it for a chef who then worked in a kitchen I worked in. I picked it up from him, took it elsewhere. A lot of the the menus that I would write as a chef and as a cook, I'd be, suddenly it was Jameson Farms lamb, and I'd attribute the ingredients to local New York sources or wherever I was cooking. I plated food to a great extent, like some of his presentations, without ever knowing it was his. His sort of reliance, or his sort of accent of quickly grilled food was something that was, I probably was also influenced by him. I realized one of the chefs who I looked up to very, very much early in my career and took a lot from was basically ripping this guy off left and right. I just didn't know it at the time. I thought, wow, this guy's a really great cook and a brilliant innovator. Little did I know until years later, this is all Jeremiah's food.
In terms of the sort of celebrity aspect, do you have any similarities that you see with yourself and Jeremiah?
No, at all, none, because understand, Jeremiah was a brilliant chef, cook, and culinary innovator who changed the entire landscape of cooking. he was the chef at least 2 very successful restaurants. These are claims I can never make for myself. You know my name because of books that I wrote, maybe, or TV shows that I made. My long 30-year career in the restaurant business was not a particularly distinguished one. Most of the restaurants I work for are closed now. I often helped in that process, to be honest. The times in my career that I thought I was a creative genius ended badly for everybody. I changed jobs an average of once a year. Never in my life did I create a single dish that, people speak of still in hushed tones. So, no, I don't see any similarity at all, other than we both spent a lot of time in the kitchen and both wrote books. I mean, that's a powerful connection. I mean, I'm very good friends with a lot of chefs whose careers are completely different than my own, who lived very different lives, had very different priorities and very higher standards. We relate because anytime, you're going to share something fundamental. If you spend 30 years living in a submarine, even if it was a really shitty submarine, it's still a submarine. You're going to have something in common with anyone else who served in a vessel, even remotely like that. You went through a system that, kind of militaristic system, in fact, that binds you together, fortunately in my case, with people who cook much better than I ever did.
Hi, Anthony. You talked about your frustration with him being written out, and I know there was other people, Martha Stewart, Mara Batali, and Wolfgang Puck. Did any of them share that frustration that you had with how he was not really present in some of the writing?
Well, I think everybody's aware of it. I think, there's an instinct why Jeremiah wasn't around. Why be a pain in the ass? Why not just, someone says, I think it was Jonathan Waxman, who certainly knew the story, but I think his feeling was like there was a general feeling among chefs. It was like, why, Jeremiah, just shut up. Put it behind you. Don't be angry about it. We don't want to hear about it anymore. It makes things uncomfortable. It's a small pond, surprisingly small pond that chefs of a certain level move in. And he became inconvenient because everybody knew if he shows up at a party, everybody's reminded, oh, geez, now we have to acknowledge that maybe this story is bullshit. I don't think any of the chefs were angry. There were a few. Regina Schrambling was angry, the food writer, and that's something that I really respect her for all the time. You regularly on Twitter remind people over the years, where's JT in this story?
If we're pushing food forward in an evolutional fashion, who do you think is carrying that torch and changing things in a positive fashion?
I don't know. I think I've been really impressed and hopeful when I see second generation Korean Americans, Filipino Americans, Mexican Americans who are redefining what American food is, so that we don't use the word like really ethnic food. It's becoming an increase, and who are making the word authentic sort of meaningless too. I mean, Roy Choi being an early example, or Angela at Mission Chinese lately, people who, maybe grew up in a Korean American or a Filipino home, but grew up eating hamburgers and tacos, and and for them, American food, and for all of us soon, I think, means food made by whoever happens to be cooking in America now. To your point, what Jeremiah did to a great extent is, when Jeremiah went out in the dining room and people wanted to see him, okay, maybe it's because he was glamorous, he was hot, he was fuckable. It doesn't matter. The fact that when he moved out into the dining room, it was part of a power shift. So now when we talk about food, we don't just talk about food. We talk about who is cooking your food, whether it's a rice farmer in Vietnam or a kid who grew up in K-Town in L.A. but decided he wanted to mix it up with Mexican and Chicano food. Who's cooking? Why are they cooking what they're cooking? What do they think they're good at? And why should we not listen to them when they tell us what they do well? That's a great improvement in the world of food when all of those things. One of the criticisms I get on the show a lot is, you stick to food, man. Don't talk about politics. Well, there's nothing more political than food. So the extent to which we can expand that discussion, I think has been a good thing, however we might have gotten there.
What advice would you give an aspiring chef?
Look, the best advice I've ever gotten as a cook, and the best advice it's held me in good stead in every industry I've been in. Show up on time. Show up on time. I made all my basic decisions about whether I'm going to invest. I mean, it's a mentoring business. A chef who suffered mightily over the years to learn how to do his or her profession, who doesn't have time to train, to mentor, but finds the time and invests that time in you because they see something in you. Maybe it's just a good resume, somebody recommended you. Show them the respect of showing up on time every day. Make allowances for late train. Show up on time. Show that you're the sort of person. Skills can be taught. Character, you either got or you don't. And that's what I was always looking for. You may not be the most talented cook in the world, but are you the sort of person who's going to reliably show the respect to me, who I don't have time, and the cooks around you, the people you work with, whether in any industry? Do you have the respect for your coworkers to show up when you said you were going to show up? Establish that, and everything else falls into line.
Some very sound advice. Well, guys, check out Jeremiah Tower, The Last Magnificent on iTunes. Order it right now and tell your friends about it. Social media, Facebook, all that. And thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah,
Lydia and
thank you for
Anthony,
having
thank you
me.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.